Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3 Iron. Make sure to give us a like, subscribe, and hit the bell to be notified for more videos just like this one. Today we're going to be taking a look at how to identify and price out rares in Path of Exile. Now I've got a couple of disclaimers to start off with. Those of you that have been around for a while know that we're not particularly looking at individual prices on particular rares or examples. There is a lot of hazards that can enter into that sort of discussion in that sort of space. So rather than discussing in particular or price checking a particular rare at a given point during a league, what we're doing and what we hope to do throughout the series is to give you and all of us together as a community some better philosophies and some better tools to evaluate the value of rares that drop regardless of the league, regardless of the time that you've played Path of Exile. We want kind of a general consensus takeaway that we all can use as an evaluative metric to see whether or not a rare that drops for us or a rare that we've crafted is going to be valuable and sellable and interactable and usable in any given particular market. So that's the goal of what we're doing today. So the first disclaimer is all prices included in the video are subject to change based on the demand, power level, and future available mods added to the core game of Path of Exile. We want to learn the general principles of what makes something valuable and then apply that knowledge to the present market. So whatever league it is that you're in right now, take these principles that we talk about today and apply them to your current market. The second disclaimer today is that we're not looking at uniques or talismans in this series, as the focus is on learning the principles for identifying why certain rare mods on certain item types are more valuable than others, rather than mechanic enabling or build enabling uniques. That's a separate discussion or a separate topic that we'll handle maybe at some point in the future, but today we're just focusing in on rares. So what makes an amulet valuable in Path of Exile? Well, there's a lot of different components that are going to make an amulet valuable, and for our discussion today we're going to see that there are pretty much four basic things. The first component is meta builds. So flavor of the month builds are going to make an amulet valuable. So in particular, when there's the start of a new league or the announcement of a new league or a massive change and expansion that comes to Path of Exile, if there are added particular skill gems or added particular stats or mods that are getting added to a particular item, in this case amulets, that can increase the value of particular amulets that drop with that mod. Now, on the other hand, there could be incredible mods that get added to the game and they're not valuable because they're not a part of what is considered to be the meta or the flavor of the month build. So depending on what league you're in, you're going to want to identify what are the meta builds, because this is going to help you identify what amulets are selling, because what amulets are in high demand. That's going to be very, very helpful to identify. Secondly, you're going to want to identify best in slot, whether that's roles or unique mechanics on a particular amulet. So for instance, if an amulet has a prefix or a suffix or an implicit that is otherwise unattainable on other pieces of gear or is less than optimal in other pieces of gear, that makes it a best in slot sort of item. Or sort of stat for that item that makes it incredibly valuable. So it could be that, for instance, as you're identifying or crafting an amulet, you hit one particular stat that's incredibly valuable because it's on a meta build as well as being best in slot. Those are ways that you can identify very quickly, even if it's just one stat. Hey, I've hit the jackpot. I've hit something here that's rather valuable. Thirdly, what makes an amulet valuable is filler stats. So oftentimes amulets are used to fill out requirements of a build. Oftentimes this is filling out defensive or offensive stats that otherwise are being made up for or are lackluster in a build. So for instance, if a build has got a lot of uniques or several different uniques that are required in it, and one of those spots that's not unique is an amulet, then oftentimes rare amulets that have got base stats on them that allow for higher leveling of gems, or base stats on them that allow for multiple different elemental resistances to be capped out, or are amulets that give maybe crit accuracy or crit multi offensive stats, or even Shaper and Elder, particular prefixes and suffixes that we'll talk about here in a minute that might be filler, may be helpful, but are not necessarily build defining. So those are filler stats. That's the third thing that makes an amulet valuable. And fourthly, as a luxury item, so something to work towards but not core to the build. So we're also today going to take a look at some rather amazing mirror tier amulets that are available in Standard League. I know some of you instantly, as soon as I say, oh, Iron Standard League. But we're going to look at some of the best available amulets in the game at the time of the recording of this video to see what are some of the luxury items that are out there. What are some of the top tier luxury items? And those of you that are already saying, well, Iron, why are you going to show us mirror tier stuff? That's not going to help me when I'm identifying a rare that drops on the ground. False. It will help you because occasionally there are some stats that are available on an amulet that you might have that's a single stat that makes your amulet valuable. Does it make it mirror tier? No. The mirror tier items are often that all of the stats on the amulet are mirror worthy, and that's what makes the amulet itself mirror worthy, because all of the stats are desired. But it could be that as you're looking at some of these mirror tier items, some of these luxury items, you notice, oh, there's a stat here or there that I should be keeping an eye out for as I'm identifying or crafting, because that single stat alone could be valuable on its own, or enough to craft on, or enough that somebody else may want to purchase it in the future. So that's some base ideas of what makes an amulet valuable. But what are the base types of amulets? So we're going to really quickly zoom through these. There are attribute-based amulets. Individual attributes are strength, intelligence, and dexterity, the amber, lapis, and jade amulets. Then you've got combo attributes as your base amulets, which include strength plus int, that's the agate, the strength dex, that's the citrine, and the dex int, which is the turquoise amulet. And then, of course, you've got the onyx, which just gives you a flat amount of attributes across the board. Again, all of these are implicits. These are the implicits on the base. So regardless of what you roll onto the amulet itself, when it becomes a rare, these will be the stats on the implicit line at its base if you have yet to corrupt it. Also, you've got regen-based amulets. You've got life-based regen, which there's the coral amulet, which only requires level 1 to use. That's flat. It's like 2 to 4 on the roll. It's very, very simple, very, very early game friendly. Then you've got HP percentage, the marble, which is required at level 74. You've also got mana regen amulets, which includes the 20 to 30%, the Power, which is the early game version of it, and then you've got the late game version of it, the blue pearl, at 48 to 56% mana regen. It requires level 77. Then lastly, you've got increased rarity amulets, which is the gold amulet, which gives you 12 to 20% increased item rarity. Take note, that is not increased item quantity, that is increased item rarity. Most magic finders are looking for increased item quantity, but some prefer to choose to use increased item rarity. All right, so what roles are unique to amulets? Well, when you're looking at Shaper or Elder drops that maybe you get later on in game and you wonder, is this particular amulet valuable simply because it's Shaper or Elder based? The answer is probably yes. Just in and of itself, the fact that it's dropped as a Shaper amulet probably makes it worth it to craft on, if not simply to sell the base because you need the extra currency to buy something else in your build. But simply because it drops as Shaper or Elder jewelry makes it valuable in and of itself. There are several different prefixes and suffixes that can drop for the Shaper that make it particularly attractive. As you're looking at these, all of these, by the way, are attained from POEDB, so you can check out their website, and of course there will be a link down below in the video description if you'd like to check it out. Oftentimes, Elder and Shaper stats grant you the ability to have a particular skill unlocked without taking up a gem slot. So the Shaper suffix grants, for instance, a particular level of the determination skill. Now, those of you that are wondering, hey, is this good because I've rolled a particular amulet that grants a particular skill? In general, I'm going to tell you no. In general, items that grant you particular skills, if they are otherwise usable via a gem, typically players are going to want to use the gem slot. Now you might be wondering why. It frees up a gem slot. Doesn't make any sense. Well, because when you socket a gem in, you can oftentimes support that skill with other things. Even if it is an aura gem and you're wondering, well, Iron, I really don't necessarily want to boost this aura because the aura that the rolled suffix gave me from the Shaper amulet is already level 20, so it's a top level roll that I'd be able to use, or it's at least a valuable roll that I'd want to be able to use. It essentially means that you can't use or socket that particular skill in another item that would further boost its level, either via an empower gem or via other unique items and unique mechanics that can boost aura gems via corruptions or via their base mechanics like an Alpha's Howl. So all of that is to say, look for the valuable rolls on amulets that drop either Elder or Shaper. If you've already ID'd it and it doesn't have one of those particular roles, that doesn't mean it's not valuable. It simply means you haven't hit one of the things that is valuable. Oftentimes, the value of Shaper and Elder amulets can change wildly and very wildly depending on the particular roles that you hit. So, speaking of the Elder has got a couple that are particularly fascinating, including a greater number of zombies, skeletons, and specters, which support and summoner, auramancer sorts of characters really love to run, as well as increased damage per strength, which is fantastic for stat stacking builds, as well as a lot of extra damage bonuses. So here you see the Elder with his prefixes has gain X percentage of physical damage as extra fire and gain percentage of non-chaos damage as extra chaos damage. So there's a lot of damage that can be increased through these amulets. So remember how we talked earlier that the fourth reason why amulets can oftentimes be valued is because they provide a filler stat, something that is to be worked towards as a luxury item, maybe, or a filler stat, something that's not necessarily required for your build, but something that increases your stats so that way you can use something else. Shaper and Elder both do that very, very well. They both provide luxury items and goals for you to aim for, as well as providing base attributes, particularly percentage increases that can be very, very valuable. All right, so what are filler stats that amulets can provide? Well, we've already hit on some of the implicits that they can provide, such as providing much needed attributes for items or gem requirements, such as strength, dexterity, and intelligence. But also there are resistance and general defense mods that can be very helpful, as amulets are used as a filler slot for many different builds. So elemental resistances, health and energy shield bonuses, evasion, armor, and block are also some ways in which amulets simply fill out builds and are not necessarily required in slot, unless of course they need a unique amulet for that particular build, in which case they're not going to be interested in buying your rare amulet anyway. So we're going to take a look at some examples of some GG mirror-worthy gear. So this right here is HamHello's mirror service and his mirror service shop thread. All of these shop threads are going to be linked down below in the video description, so you can check them out. This is the Carrion Noose. It is an onyx amulet, which means it provides all attributes. You can see that it has been blessed there to have the perfect roll on that implicit. It also gives a good amount of flat intelligence. It gives a good amount of flat lightning damage to attacks. It gives a good amount of flat maximum energy shield. And then it also gives 12% increased attributes, along with 1% increased damage per 15 intelligence, along with crafted on their mastercrafted 16% increased lightning damage. So when you think about this, this is, as as HamHello says, this is the undisputed #1 Hawa amulet on the market. If you're building a Hawa build or following a Hawa build, this amulet would be great. So instead of scaring you off and saying, oh no, Iron, I'm never going to have an amulet like this, don't worry. Most of us don't, okay? That's why HamHello's got it, and he's got a mirror service thread for it. However, pay attention to those individual stats that are on the Onyx Amulet, because if Hawa is a popular build during the league in which you're watching this video, then you can look for amulets that stack a whole bunch of intelligence, that stack a whole bunch of added lightning damage, that maybe stack energy shield, or that have got a shaper roll on them for increased attributes as well as increased damage per intelligence. Those are all great things to keep an eye out for individually, because as people start a league and even transition into the mid-league, a lot of people are looking to play other builds or transition their build from one particular build guide to another. So as folks are doing that, even if you hit one or two of these particular stats on their own, that could be valuable in the particular league that you're in. Moving on to our second example, we've got Zippo and Hot's mirror service. They're a tag team. They work together on crafting things. This is the Pandemonium Pendant. It's an onyx amulet, and it gives 50 to strength, 88 to maximum life, 16% to all resistances, and gives 4.5% of maximum life per second to maximum life leech rate. That is insane. It also gives you 13% of non-chaos damage as extra chaos damage. This is, of course, an Elder particular base that can roll that, and then it's got mastercrafted on it, 27% increased global critical strike chance. So this is a wonderful, wonderful example of a filler amulet that you wouldn't necessarily build an entire build around, right? If you had this amulet, yes, it is mirror worthy. I'm not trying to diminish the value of this particular amulet. This is an amazing amulet. But when you look at this amulet, you don't simply look at it and go, oh, well, because of this amulet, I'm going to play X, Y, or Z build. Rather, you look at this amulet and you go, wow, this fills in all of the stats that I could ever want on a life-based build that is going to depend on leech as a defensive mechanic. It's fantastic. That opens up all sorts of different options for you. So if you find a combination of maybe a couple of these, maybe a tier 1 or tier 2 max life roll in combination with max elemental resistances or all elemental resistances, that's fantastic. That's going to be very valuable, especially early on in the league when everybody is hunting for good defensive gear. Our third example comes from, and I can't quite say this name right, so forgive me, from kristinasebetic. Anyway, so sorry if I butchered your name. This is the Chimeric Idol and Onyx Amulet with perfectly blessed 16 to all attributes. This has got a bunch of accuracy on it, 387 to flat accuracy. And then it's also got crit strike multiplier on it. So oftentimes amulets are slots where crit builds in particular will try to get as much value as they can out of crit multi and crit chance. So it could be that your amulet that you're looking at doesn't necessarily have all of these particular stats put together, but if it's got crit multi on it and crit chance on it, along with accuracy, there's a good chance that that amulet is going to be valuable. This, of course, is also an attribute. Stacking builds Dream when it comes to stacking dexterity, 1% increased damage per 15 dexterity, and it's also got Mastercrafted onto it, 23% increased elemental damage with attack skills. And, you know, just to boot, it's also a increased item quantity legacy amulet. That's just a great amulet. But anyway, moving on. Our fourth example is the Death Collar, the Lapis Amulet that has plus 30 to Intelligent. It also grants the level 20 aspect of the Spider skill. One of the reasons why I wanted to point out this particular amulet is, remember how we were talking earlier about how some specific skills that are otherwise attainable through gems aren't necessarily very valuable on an amulet? This is an example where you're getting a skill aspect of the spider that is otherwise unattainable through a gem socket, and so it's a great place to put it, and there's a lot of people out there that would love to include aspect of the spider into their build. This also has, of course, global crit strike multi on it. It's an energy shield based amulet, which of course is fantastic. There's a bunch of different builds out there that are going to be CI LE based for their attack skills, and then he's got Mastercrafted on there as well, increased global critical strike chance, and he's got damage penetrates 10% of elemental resistances, which is a fantastic amulet. Moving on to our fifth and final GG mirror tier worthy example of amulets that are very valuable. This is the Victory Clasp made from Demi's mirror service thread, so you can check out Demi's thread there, and of course, once again, it's all down below in the video description if you want to go check it out. He's got tons of awesome stuff out there. I love looking at all of Demi's stuff and just like gaping at it. It's amazing. So this is an A-Gate amulet. It's got 24 to strength and intelligence. It's got 10% increased cast speed, so rather than looking at an attack-based build, we're looking at a cast-based build. This has also got global critical strike multi on it. It's got 22% increased maximum energy shield, which is utterly ridiculous coming out of the amulet slot. And then he's got two highly desirable perfect rolls. They gain 20% of physical damage as extra cold damage and gain 20% of physical damage as extra lightning damage. This is absolutely ridiculous in terms of filling out the offensive stats of a build. Again, you're looking at this amulet and you're not saying this is necessarily a build enabling build. It opens up a lot of different options for you as a caster, but it doesn't necessarily lock you in to say I'm going to pick this particular ascendancy and pick this particular skill gem. It's a filler stat, and that's oftentimes what amulets are used for, is to fill in offensive or defensive stats. So some general pricing tips. So early in a league, you can bet that amulets that roll individual stats with rolls that are either tier 1 or 2 will be valuable alone. So in other words, if you just roll a single line item that is energy shield, that is health, that is an elemental resistance, if it's just a single individual stat that's a tier 1 or tier 2, that's probably going to be valuable in and of itself, whether that's for resistances, for health, for energy shield, for mana. And then moving on, in early league, combinations of stats, mid-tier to top tier, will be valuable together, right? So you can think of things like resists plus flat attributes, because you see so many different builds that need attributes as you're scaling up. You don't want to necessarily use your passive points on those if you're missing out on some attributes. Crit multi, as well as HP and mana, especially for mind over mana builds. So if you've got life-based builds or even energy shield builds, but particularly HP plus mana, if you're in a league right now where MOM is particularly strong or particularly prevalent, it's one of the meta builds is to build MOM, then of course you can be looking for amulets that have got HP plus mana. A lot of the times you're just looking at an amulet and going, why would I want extra mana on there? But oftentimes when MOM is flavor of the month or is meta, it's very, very strong. And again, if you're playing in softcore trade league, that's probably not the case. But if you're playing in a hardcore trade league, that's definitely going to be the case because there's just a lot more MOM builds over in hardcore. So continuing on with some more general pricing tips. As a league ages, the longer a league goes, you can still bet that some of these amulets are going to retain value. Individual stats with multiple roles in tier 1 or tier 2. So earlier we said early in a league, you could just look for something that just has one line that's tier 1 or tier 2. Well, as a league ages, more and more people are getting access to more and more currency and more valuable items. And so, of course, individual stats that have got multiple tier 1 roles will be valuable. Particularly crit plus crit multi, when you see a combination like that, that's fantastic. When you see attributes like the Shaper's percentage attributes suffix, which is 10 to 12% on the tier 1, that's fantastic. Elder prefix gain X damage as additional Y damage, that is also fantastic if you can get those to drop. And then combination of stats that are going to be top tier. Tier 1 stats will be very, very valuable together, whether that's triple resistances. If you can get an amulet that is just built for defense, a lot of the times those are so valuable because a player will simply buy one of those amulets and then have multiple different characters that they play throughout the league reuse that amulet. So if you've got an amulet that is very, very well rolled on its triple resistances, a lot of the time you can charge a lot for that because you won't necessarily be selling it multiple different times to multiple different people. Oftentimes, rather than necessarily buying, let's say, 3 amulets across 3 characters that each have got double resistances across the board, a lot of the time somebody will simply put all of their funds into one triple resist amulet and then share that across multiple different characters. So maybe some of you out there are thinking, well, I would never do that for my character. That doesn't matter. There will be a buyer out there who may do that. And so that's how you want to evaluate the value on your amulet, and the price range on your amulet is what your potential buyer is willing to pay for it, not what you yourself would necessarily do. So you want to always be thinking about your buyer, not just how you would necessarily use it. Okay, second combination being multiple damage plus accuracy. Oftentimes accuracy is a undervalued stat. So much of the time, especially early on in a league, a lot of players will play non-crit builds or will play with resolute technique or will build around ascendancies that don't necessarily need to stack accuracy. So Juggernaut being one of those, where accuracy stacking is good, but you already get a lot of flat accuracy, so you're hitting very consistently. Well, with an amulet, the longer a league goes on and the more expensive players build their builds and the more crit builds get prevalent as people have more currency to spend on that, multiple damage rolls plus accuracy becomes very, very valuable as a league goes on. So, to sum up, knowledge of the meta provides you with a baseline for value, all right, for a couple of reasons. First off, this tells you who the buyers are, is looking for what. So this tells you your buyers and it tells you your demand inside the league. If you don't know what the meta is of a particular league, the best place that you can go to look that up is the official build guide forums and just see what builds have been recently made that league, or to see what builds have been bumped and adjusted for that league. You can simply look at the first page of each different ascendancy and sort from each different ascendancy to look and see what builds are particularly popular this particular league in different ascendancies. And you can literally look and see the number of comments on a particular thread and just go, yep, that particular build is way more popular than this other build over here that's got 2 comments and 2 replies and it was made 6 months ago. You can tell which build is going to be more popular, and so you can look and see what items are recommended in the amulet slot to see exactly what that meta is going to look like in that particular league. This tells you what is popular in relationship to the present league and therefore what's going to shape the meta. So looking beyond simply starting from a league, you can oftentimes tell what's going to be good throughout the course of a league by looking at what builds are strong, because oftentimes early adopters will take on a particular build and then show that off, particularly through YouTube, through Twitch, streamers, as well as people completing different challenges and completing different bosses will tell you exactly, and will even show you what characters are going to be strong in this particular league. So that gives you an incredibly valuable piece of data to know exactly what sort of amulets to be crafting and what sort of amulets to be identifying and looking for, is simply by knowing what is meta and what will shape the meta moving forward. Secondly, stats are valuable on amulets often as fillers for builds. So A lot of our discussion today has been talking about filler. This is a massive area that amulets provide value in. Not every single piece of rare gear is going to be a filler piece of gear. Oftentimes there are very specific stats that you're looking for on particular pieces of items, which means a lot of the time in our jewelry slots, they are filler slots to fill out the rest of a build. So you're going to want to look for damage, accuracy, attack, cast speed, crit plus crit multi. These are wonderful fillers and oftentimes are the primary search stat line when people are looking to fill out their build in the amulet slot. Also, damage as a shaper or elder based item, whether that's elder gains X sorts of damage as extra Y damage, or multiple elemental resistances for defensive. This is huge. So often, we just went over the example, players will simply use a singular amulet that they get that's very, very well rolled for defensive purposes, because a lot of different builds can fill that slot with those rolls. Fourthly, attributes. So shaper in percent increased is huge, especially the longer leagues go on in general, the more players play stat stacking builds. That doesn't necessarily hold true all of the time. You can correct me if I'm wrong. If we're in a particular league where that's not true, absolutely leave me a comment and just blast me. Say, Iron, you're totally way off on that. But for the most part, as leagues go on, as a general rule, shaper amulets are going to increase in their value for stat stacking builds as the league goes on and as more players play those sorts of builds. So attribute stacking is a wonderful way to determine the value of an amulet. All right, so what do you think? Leave us a comment down below and let us know. What are some of the most expensive amulets that you've ever purchased? What are some of the coolest amulets you've ever crafted? Maybe you've got something that you've crafted. Maybe you're somebody that's crafted something that's mirror tier worthy, or maybe it's not even mirror tier worthy. Maybe it was just cool for your particular build. Maybe it was a solo self-found item that you found or that you crafted. Leave us a comment down below and let us know what the coolest amulet you've crafted is. What are some of the most valuable amulets that you've ever sold? Maybe that was a legacy amulet in standard, or maybe it was just an awesome amulet in a particular league. Let us know down below. And what do you look for in an amulet when you're evaluating its value? So I've talked here for several minutes about what I look for when I'm evaluating an amulet and whether or not it's valuable to my build or whether or not it will be valuable to another build. But what do you look for? What are some of the tips and tricks that you have as you are evaluating an amulet? Leave us a comment down below, and as always, I hope that today is the day that you craft a mirror tier valued amulet.